So thank you very much, Julia Reis, for the short introduction. My name is Thomas Weith, and I'm one of the moderators of this session towards spatial justice in a sustainable urban rural context. You see the time schedule here. We will have 5 presentations in total. I will start with a presentation about spatial justice and regional spatial justice. Then the colleague Wolfgang will have a presentation about equality of living conditions and regional burden sharing. And then Annette Steinführer will have a presentation about spatial justice only with the people affected, some considerations from a rural perspective. After these 3 presentations, we will have a short round of discussion, and after that, Sebastian Bollard will have a talk about telecoupling and environmental justice, and then Ludger Gailing about spatial justice and energy justice, the case of wind power plants. So that's the plan, and after the presentation, we will hopefully have time for discussions about what kind of justice do people want, what are adequate conceptual approaches, and what are the challenges for transformative regional development. So that's the presentation or the time schedule. So so I will start on my presentation to start with a session.
Yeah, and also a warm welcome from me. My name is Ludger Gailing. I'm also one of the co-organizers of this session. And just for a short introduction, who is Thomas Weith? Some information about him. Professor Thomas Weith is heading the working group, co-design of change and innovation in the research area, land use and governance at the ZALF, the Leibniz Center for Agricultural Landscape Research in Müncheberg, which is a really small town in Brandenburg. And his work there is about regional development, spatial planning, and transdisciplinary spatial research, as well as about sustainable land management and land use policies. So, Thomas, the virtual floor is yours.
So, thank you, Ludger. So I hope I will start the right presentation now. So, yes, dear colleagues, thank you for the short introduction. My topic for today is spatial justice and regional spatial justice. And as you know, justice and talking about justice is on the one hand everyday issue. So we find a lot of things unjust in reality. On the other hand, the spatial dimension of justice is discussing the spatial dimension of justice is a very old discussion. As you can see here, this is the name of a street in Switzerland. It's called Justice Street, or where you can see that especially in cities, we have also a spatial dimension with discussions about justice. So my presentation basis on works of a project called Regerecht, which is financed from the German Ministry of Education and Research with a lot of additional partners, you see. And the background is to have just solutions for urban-rural interrelations in several cases in German cities and regions as well. I want to give an overview of general aspects in the beginning, also as an introductory part for the session, then highlighting some discourses about spatial justice, formulating basic consequences and aspects for discussing spatial justice. And then I want to highlight especially the aspect of transformative or commutative justice. What is the additional value of discussing these dimension of justice? And then I will give you some examples for that. As I told you, discussing justice is more than 2,000 years old. So you see these old Greek philosophers of the political philosophy like Plato or Aristotle, they discuss justice issues, but also we have in the history of political philosophy authors like Hume or as up to now Rawls or Otfried Höffe. They all discuss aspects of justice, and we have several more. I don't want to highlight these all, but the important thing is that they give us some ideas how to differentiate and how to focus on the various aspects of justice, because justice is a very, very general term. So, looking to discussions of spatial justice, we have also several authors. We know them more or less quite good, starting with David Harvey, with Lefebvre's Right to the City, Jacobs, Feinstein, Stauper, all these important authors published books about or articles about justice. And I think from my point of view, the most comprehensive one is the book of Edward Sawyer about seeking spatial justice. And during the last few centuries, we have also differentiation in different lines of discussion. We have this more general discourse about territorial or spatial justice, but we have also lines of discussions like we will see here also in this context about environmental justice, about infrastructure planning and infrastructure justice, but also about land and agriculture. So we have several lines of discussions, and to be honest, it's quite challenging to have a full overview of all these lines of discussion. What is important that there is a differentiation between justice, equality, and cohesion. So keep that in your mind. We have also, for several years, it is a political and societal discourse about justice. So, starting with the Rio Agenda 1993, where intergenerational justice is mentioned, we have in the SDGs. I don't want to read this fully, but we have several justice aspects, not only in the beginning of the Rio Agenda and in the SDGs, but also in several goals of the SDGs. But we have also in the European Union, with the Charter of Fundamental Rights from 2012, an extra chapter about justice, and we discuss it in Europe under the term of territorial cohesion also, or the equality of living conditions, as we will have it later on in the discussion on the European and national levels as well. So that means, on the one hand, that it is clear we have to discuss justice in a spatial context, always in relation to the sustainability goals. So to look at the ecological, economic, social, and cultural dimensions, but also looking to the solving of real-world problems, which means, from my point of view, that we have to discuss about processes of integrating values, norms, and knowledges. And you can see here a figure of how transdisciplinary processes can support this generation or this integration of values, norms, and knowledges that not only one actor group is defining it, but we have a more or less ongoing bargaining process. This is the core of the figure to say what we will have in future. When we deal with justice, it's also clear, and we read this from this also from in the texts of these old philosophers, that it will have a dimension of a normative orientation for solving conflicts, not only for action but also for solving conflicts. And when we go to the time scale, as I mentioned before, to the looking to the SDGs, we will have intergenerational aspects to be included, and we just not only have to look at the individuals and the individual opportunities, but also to the capacities of the social society and the societal actors as well, in a multi-level actor system. And what this means, I think, Sebastian, you will show it later as well, but this means also having not only several levels, but also several spatial scales. And this is the point when the term regional comes into mind, to say we have to think about not only about one entity, but about the interrelations between different entities. On the left hand, you see a figure of urban-rural interrelations, like flows of people, goods, but also of knowledges. But we have also these Taylor coupling thinkings you see at the right-hand side, so that from other regions we have influences on the justice discourses. And the third aspect from the general discussions is that we can divide the discussion into three general directions, to say, okay, when we talk about justice, we have to talk about political justice by institutions, e.g. like standards for planning procedures. You have to talk about distributive justice, like evidence-based reasons for distribution of subsidies or infrastructure locations. And we have to think about transactional justice, or the justitia commutativa. That means originally that that if two people are in a bargaining situation, they have to exchange their subjective imagination about the values of goods and things. And especially the third aspect will give us, from my point of view, new ideas for discussing spatial justice. When you look to the settlement development, we have quite often the situation not only in Europe, but also in China and Asian countries, but also in African countries, that we try to concentrate the settlement development and say, okay, growth poles or central places are an adequate concept for distributive justice, and also to have a basis for unequal distribution. When we go to this justitia commutativa or transactional justice, this changes the perspective, and that says that we have the same development rights for every municipality, for example. That means we do not only discuss distributive aspects, but we discuss development rights in a way that we have the same development rights for every municipality. And that means turning around the perspective to say, if we have the same development rights, the refused development has to have a compensation. That means we have to develop compensation schemes, and this would open new options for rural regions as well. Or if you look to digitalization, we have currently the situation that high-speed internet is very unequal distributed from the argument that unequal distribution is based on the higher demand. In cities or urbanized regions, we can say if every actor all around the world has the same development rights, especially for their knowledge skills, we will formulate as a consequence that no spatial differentiation is more or less possible if you use this transactional justice idea. So there are two examples showing that different justice perspectives open new opportunities for thinking about spatial development and spatial justice. So we currently discuss this situation in an example, as I told you, in a project in Mecklenburg-Pomerania. So where we currently think which ways can we handle to support these spatial justice aspects. So as a more concrete example for all these general terms in the beginning, we try to figure out what are the urban-suburban rural interrelations to especially understand the urban-rural nexus. Also having a view to the conflicts and finding the reasons for the urban-rural interrelations, but also discussing governance aspects and elaborating a value-based basis for these cooperative transactions. And last but not least, discussing, as you will see it in the other presentations as well, justice aspects of territory, energy, but also land banking aspects and digitalization. And in the end, having new ideas about development of urban-rural interrelations. So that's all as an introductory part from my side. What I want to give you is an overview of, or an introduction to the various aspects of the discussion of justice and spatial justice, and giving you an idea how to deal with these different dimensions and what it is, and why it is worth to discuss it also in spatial contexts. Thanks a lot for listening.
So thank you, Thomas, and also for remaining exactly in the given time. Thank you very much. I think we would have time for one short question of understanding, if there is any, in the chat or between us, for sure. Sebastian, you have a question.
Yes, thank you. So what do you exactly mean with land banking?
That means to collect land in a strategic way before you need it in the end. Yeah. So to have an organization buying land for public uses, for example, for compensation schemes, but before you really need it, to have a more strategical approach for using the land. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So far, no other questions in the chat, which is okay. Please keep in mind your contributions to the discussion, and also other questions you will have to Thomas or to the next speakers. So the next speaker will be Professor Wolfgang Köck. He's the head of the Department of Environmental and Planning Law at the Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research, the UFZ in Leipzig in Germany. And his research revolves around issues of law in environment and society, environmental and planning law, governance, and institutions.
Yeah, Thank you very much for this introduction. Hello again to all of the participants. My name is Wolfgang Cook, and I would like to speak about equivalent living conditions, a guiding principle for regional planning. And I have a little bit changed the title because burden sharing, regional burden sharing, was too much for a 15-minute presentation. I hope it will go in this way. So what can I do in the next 15 minutes? This is my overview. At first, I want to speak about equivalent living conditions, a revitalized normative approach for spatial justice in Germany. Then I want to speak about what does equivalent living conditions mean. Then I will have a perspective on the German constitution. Is it included in the German constitution? My fourth part will be about equivalent living conditions as the guiding principle for regional planning in the Federal Regional Planning Act. And my last part is about the legal framework of regional planning and how it can be strengthened to achieve equivalent living conditions. And you can see I'm coming from the law issues, and I'm a lawyer, and so I have a look on the governance structure and the framework, how we can deal with spatial justice, and equivalent living conditions is a legal term for discussing this issue. So I'm starting with my first part. For more than 30 years, equivalent living conditions, or we can also say similar standards of living, have been the guiding principle of spatial policy and regional planning in Germany. But for this long time, we have to recognize that the objective has not yet been achieved. We have still growing disparities between regions and also between urban and rural areas. And the economists always say the objective is too ambitious. So quit the objective. It's too expensive to ensure equivalent living conditions in the whole country. But in 2013, we have a new situation. There was a referendum in Bavaria, and this referendum was successful. And after that, equivalent living conditions have been included as an objective in the Bavarian state constitutions. And after that, politicians and the scientific community declared that we have a rebirth of a principle that was before declared dead. And we can see after the referendum in Bavaria, we have also a discussion in the whole nation. So from Bavaria, it went to the federal level, and the coalition agreement between the CDU and the SPD in 2018 there is laid down an action plan for serve the objective of equivalent living conditions. It's called Unser Plan für Deutschland, and this plan is now on the way. We have first results. So we have a new, I think, a rethinking of spatial policy. We are talking about bringing the social state back in, and we can take the question, is there really hope for similar standards of living everywhere in Germany? Now I want to speak a little bit about what does equivalent living conditions mean. And as a lawyer, at first I have to look to the laws, and I see we have no legal definition in the Constitution or in the Federal Regional Planning Act. But we have a conceptual understanding of the Federal Regional Planning Program of 1975, and this conceptual understanding is quite good. We can read there, equivalent living conditions within the meaning of this program are given if citizens in all sub-areas of the federal territory have access to an adequate supply of housing, employment, opportunities in public infrastructure facilities at a reasonable distance, and if a decent environment is available. In no sub-area of the territory may these services fall below a certain level. So this definition means there must be minimum standards, especially for the infrastructural equipment in the whole space. And this definition is also taken over by the Enquete Commission Equivalent Living Conditions in Bavaria in 2017. And this Enquete Commission says equivalent living condition doesn't mean equal living conditions, but a minimum standard of living conditions must be achieved everywhere, and that means basic infrastructure of services of general interests, like medical supply, like school and others. So my third part is the term of equivalent living conditions also laid down in our constitution. And when we have a look on our federal constitution, we can see that there is no direct constitutional mandate about equivalent living conditions, but there are some important legal approaches we can use. So at first, we can use the social state clause. It's very useful as a starting point, but the social state clause is not directly targeted to territorial cohesion issues. But we can use it, and we can make arguments, constitutional arguments from that. On a second level, we can see in the Constitution we have defined joint tasks of the federal government and the lender for certain especially relevant issues. So, for example, improvement of the regional economic structure. So, federal level and lender level, they are working together for the improvement of regional economic structure, and that has an impact on living conditions. And on the third way, we can see there is an establishment of a financial equalization system between the federal level and the state level, and between the lender and also between municipalities. So we have this system just to make all the public finances, the public budgets more equal, and to have a compensation schemes that poor lender will have more money for their tasks. So overall, we can see especially the financial equalization system is important for spatial cohesion, but it is not sufficient for similar living conditions, because this financial equalization system just focused on public budget and not on all the private investments, and the living conditions are strong dependent to private investments. So my fourth part is about equivalent living conditions as a guidance principle for regional planning in Germany. And here, if we have a look in our Federal Regional Planning Act, we can see that similar standards of living shall be established in all regions. This is a guidance principle. And the federal Regional Planning Act includes some legal instruments for enforcing these guiding principles. And the first and the most important legal instrument is the spatial planning itself. So there is the opportunity to designate central sites, so-called zentrale Orte, and this designation of central sites leads to public investments, because public investments have to concentrate on central sites and will give money into these central sites. We can ask the question, is this sufficient for ensure equivalent living conditions? Or do we need also social sites for similar standards of living? And this is a current debate within the scenery of regional planners. The second important instrument is the instrument of regional cooperation. In the Federal Act, it's called raumordnerische Zusammenarbeit. And here we can see this, a low level of institutionalization, because it more depends on contracts, and if contracts will happen, this depends on win-win situations, and where no win-win situation is, we don't have contracts, and so regional cooperation doesn't have that impact what it could have. So my question as a lawyer is, should regional planning instruments be strengthened for the interest to come to equivalent living conditions? And so I have a look on the instruments in the Federal Regional Planning Act, and I have identified two important legal starting points for improving spatial planning in the interest of equivalent living conditions. At first, I think it could be useful to establish a benchmark regulation setting minimum standards for spatial infrastructure. So at the moment we have a lot of indicators, and we have also different indicators on the federal level and on the Länder level. And I think it could be a progress if we come from indicators to binding benchmarks, and therefore we need a benchmark regulation, or let's say a Maßstäbegesetz in German. And the second instrument could be the establishment of a governance mechanism. And this governance mechanism should be based on a spatial monitoring system. We have such monitoring systems in most of the Länder, but not in all of the Länder. And if we use a special monitoring system, we can have a look on disparities, on spatial disparities. And so on the basis on this special monitoring system, it's possible to make an obligation to draw up action plans if there is a risk of falling below minimum standards. And we should add some mechanism for special financial allocations if we have a situation or a risk of falling below minimum standards in space. So my final remark is just a conclusion. So I would like to show that in Germany, the debate on spatial justice is not only a political debate, it's also a legal debate. Spatial justice is anchored in a guiding principle of regional planning, the objective of equivalent living conditions. For me, it's just another term for debating spatial justice. Important instruments to ensure equivalent living conditions are the financial equalization scheme, regional planning, and regional cooperation. The debate on equivalent living conditions has led to a debate about minimum standards of spatial infrastructure. This is, let's say, a hard fact. We can discuss about equivalent living conditions, but after all, we can identify some minimum standards, and this means some minimum standards of infrastructure. And this is my fourth result is that spatial planning legislation can help to achieve the objective by providing benchmarks for minimum standard and by providing a governance mechanism for intervening if the minimum standards is not met. So thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you very much, Wolfgang Köck. So are there any questions of understanding? Perhaps here in the room and in the chat. And this worked very good the last time. You can, Rafael Karutz helps us. He writes down the questions of understanding from all the people outside this room, and Wolfgang Köck would have the possibility to answer to the questions also in the chat. But there yet no question, but you would have the time to ask your questions, and Wolfgang Köck is there to answer to the questions in the chat. So no questions here in the room, and this gives us the opportunity to continue with our session, continue to the next speaker, from the lawyer to the people on the ground in rural societies. Dr. Annette Steinführer from the Thünen Institute of Rural Studies in Braunschweig is here. We are happy that you are here. Her scientific interests are impacts of social demographic change on small towns, social spatial processes in rural areas, and regional disparities or social ecological studies. So the floor is yours.
I don't know which presentation mode you see right now. Just give me a hint whether it's the right one or the wrong one.
It's the wrong one.
The right one. So, wait, I changed. Better. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. And I think that my presentation fits very well, actually, to what Wolfgang Köck just has discussed. I will also refer to the equivalence of living conditions. Spatial under the headline of this equivalence of living conditions is very often discussed or attributed from an urban or rather a metropolitan perspective. And what I okay, thank you for the hint. I should be better now. I would like to adopt a rural perspective, and I will all. Oh, I'm a bit lost, sorry. I will talk about the people and not so much about the law. I will not talk about maps, people's lives. I will shortly embed the on spatial justice within rural studies, and I will then have 3 steps, which is talking spatial injustice, doing spatial injustice, and dealing with spatial injustice, all this by giving short examples, and then in the end, of course, I will conclude. So, the first step, to embed spatial justice. Wolfgang Köck just said that it's a a topic that comes up time and again in Germany, and I think that this normative perspective spatial justice is quite well established. It increasingly focused on the real or perceived or apparent differences between urban and rural areas. Clear understanding actually where the limits and delimitations are. In urban studies, in the last years, a debate on the right to the city established, which also has a rural justice. This debate is still a bit hidden, the right to the countryside, but I was reminded of it this morning when I listened to the first presentations in the opening session. I would like to stress here that the rural is not restricted to functional areas and to functions for the agglomerations. This morning we heard the term Umland, so the urban hinterland, the environs of the large cities. This is one expression of the rural, but it's not the only one. Justice and injustice from a rural perspective will also allow us to, or has to allow us also to leave aside the metropolitan issue. However, and this is also something I think that we will discuss in the next hour or so, is that space is just one dimension of justice, and it's not a very precise one. Equivalence of living conditions, Gleichwertigkeit der Lebensverhältnisse, has been an issue that came up in the past 70 years time and again. This is the speeches in the German Bundestag between 1949 mentionings of the term equivalence in these speeches. And I like about this figure that you see that it has had certain peaks always in times of economic and societal crisis, and then it again. And each time, and recently in the last years, actually, in the last 2-3 years, there's a redefinition and there are re-operationalizations. What do we mean by this formula? What do lawyers mean? What do politicians mean? What do sociologists mean? But also what do people understand under this term of equivalence? Politicians are one group talking about spatial justice and injustice, but as Wolfgang also already said, is there are other and very famous in this debate actually are economists. Economists tell us, for instance, the quite famous Meinhard Miegel in Germany, now it's 5 years ago, had the feeling to express that villages are relicts. So villages have to die, will die. And there are other discussions and formulations which are we can anymore. So Germany, as one of the richest countries in the world, cannot afford spatial justice. We had a recent debate 2 years ago when our Federal Minister of Education said, I think in an interview, that we don't need 5G at each milk can, so nicht an jeder Milchkanne, which is, by the way, a very weird understanding of what agriculture is today. And this was a moment actually when the issue of spatial justice and injustice and vividly discussed. In large parts of the media, but also in urban studies, we have an explicit or implicit understanding of an urban hegemony over rurality. And my final example comes from Bavaria, because what Wolfgang just told us about the process of having the equivalence of living conditions in the state constitution of Bavaria was preceded by paper by a committee of inquiry, the Zukunftsrat Bayern, in 2010, which wanted to develop solely the cities of Bavaria as high performance centers and leave rural areas the function as a mere residual space. And this was the moment when also the public, actually the population of Bavaria and run this referendum. I have a glossary of talking spatial injustice, and it's now it covers about 50 years. Some parts of the terms that you find in Germany when when rural shrinkage, rural decline, whatever it is called, are described. And I also updated time and again. So this term abgehängt sein, the state of being decoupled, is the most recent term in my glossary. So if you have other terms, I'm always open to collect them. So I want to leave the talking about spatial injustice and come to doing spatial injustice. This would be actually a term, a discussion, I think, for an hour or so. So I just give you one example. This comes actually from my own research in rural areas across Germany. And there are two problems that are linked to each other. In spite of being one of the most wealthiest countries in the world, many municipalities in different parts of Germany actually lack the money for fulfilling their basic tasks. So not their voluntary tasks, but really their basic tasks. And one of the traditional solutions since the 1970s actually is to create ever larger municipal units, political units, in order to have a more efficient and more effective administration. And you see this here for the example of Saxony-Anhalt, which was the most radical transformer in this regard in the last years. So it expanded lots of small towns and villages and also larger towns into partly really huge units that belong to the largest towns in whole Germany. The problem is that the municipal budgets of these municipalities stays usually very tight, and the villages that are amalgamated into these new units lose their political, their financial independence, they lose self-esteem, they lose their self-determination, and also their identity. And instead of providing the municipalities with, let's say, a sound budget, there is the tendency of ever more project. And there's a lot of project money around actually, so we are not, it's not the shortage, at least before Corona, it was not the shortage of money. So we have project money from the European Union, from federal state, from different state, from foundations, etc. This is usually short-term money. It is non-sustainable, and very often these projects are not. The actors are not able to transform them into sustainable new organizations. After having talked about talking spatial injustice and doing spatial injustice, I want to give you two examples on how people deal with spatial. I could talk about this for quite a long time, but I have only, let's say, 2 minutes, so therefore two short examples. The first example comes from a research that I did with two colleagues a few years ago in the Harz Mountains. And what we did is residents, it was all old ladies, some old ladies of the villages. In this case, it was the village Neudorf, so the new village. It's really called like that. How do they? What do they do in their daily lives? Where do they go to the doctor? they do their shopping, and how do they get to all these places? And so, and from these talks, this map arose, and you don't need to see this, but this kind of being active very much depends on car mobility. So there's public transport is a huge problem, but and this map is very rich and very large, because you now see my second example, which is from the neighboring village, which is called Strasberg, and there you see this picture. And the activity space of these elderly residents of this village is much more restricted. It is due to a lack of car mobility or a driving license, resources, and it is very much due to the deficient public transport, which is a major attribute of rural areas, not only in Germany, but at least across many countries in Europe. So actually these two pictures only make sense with each other. So this is actually what daily life in a rather remote village is about today. Another example that I want to give is not from my own research, but it is from a policy citizen dialogue of the German Ministry of Culture a few years ago. And in 10 villages, citizens were asked what they need in future to have a good life in the countryside. So, and what people here mention is that they need jobs, they need public transport, they need medical care, they need supply of different kinds. And this is very basic. So what you see here is they are not expecting the living standards that are available in the large cities in Berlin or even in Halle. It is really much about a decent life. And what I also find in my own research time and again, it is very much about maintaining what is there. So it's about not losing more than they all. This is really very much basic, and it's about maintenance. I come to my conclusion and to my final slide, and I have 4 conclusions about urban-rural spatial justice. In my mind, spatial justice also requires verbal justice, and attributing villages that they will certainly die is verbal injustice. This also is related to my second conclusion. Spatial justice requires to be on a par with each other, so to talk auf Augenhöhe with each other. And as I said, for instance, villages and small towns are not only the hinterland of own rights. You might have heard the term flyover states. And this is a way actually fly over, or from a top-down perspective, spatial justice and injustice is attributed. So you are all aware of all these colorful maps, blue and red, about successful and deprived regions. However, this is only one way how to measure spatial justice and injustice. And and this is my final conclusion, would always argue that spatial justice and injustice also has to be discussed with the people that are affected, and they have to be, they are the experts on their own lives, and they should be able and also empowered to tell their stakes and their impressions about spatial justice and injustice. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you very much, Annette Steinführer, for your talk, for your ideas, for sharing them with us. We now, again, would have the time to take a look on questions of understanding, perhaps here in the room. And I think we are a little bit running out of time, so there is no time for discussion now. But as I said in the beginning, please keep in mind your contributions to the discussion. We will have the time for it in the end, with one exception, because Wolfgang Köck, he has to leave us earlier. So we would have time now for one or two questions or remarks related to what Wolfgang Köck said. Is there anything in the room, in the chat, Raphael Karutz? So now it's not only about questions of understanding, but also about contributions to the discussions related to what Wolfgang Köck said. If not, you would have the time to ask them also to tell us these questions in the chat. But Thomas Weith, he wants to say something.
Yeah, only to have one question to Wolfgang Köck. So I can't follow fully your argumentation about the minimal standards and the equivalent living conditions, but will it really cover fully the meaning of spatial justice in your terms? So looking to distributive aspects and procedural aspects, but as I mentioned before, there is also the aspect of transactional justice, so will it really cover these minimal standards, also these dimensions? So this is my question.
Thank you for the question. It doesn't cover all aspects. That's for sure. I've just discussed the meaning of the term equivalent living conditions, and we can, and if there is no clear definition, I think we need some hard facts to implement it, and we can make many directions of equivalent living conditions, but I think when you just come to a hard fact, you have to recognize some minimum standards, and this is not full justice, but it's a basic level that all kind of spaces should have. And I cannot say what it is in material things, but I think it's worthwhile to lay it down, not only in lists of indicators, but in benchmarks, in legal binding benchmarks. So you have a baseline, and I think this could be a progress compared to the situation we have now.
So,
thank you.
And I switch over to you, Thomas, right?
Yes. So we have now had now three presentations. Thank you again for these presentations, and so we will have two additional one. First, starting with Sebastian Boyard with telecoupling and environmental justice, and then following with Ludger Gailing about spatial justice and energy justice. So I will introduce in a short way Sebastian Boyard. He's, if I am right, a postdoc in the Labor and Social Ecological Transition Research Group at the University of Bonn, there at the Institute of Geography. He realized research about spatial justice for several years, and especially about environmental justice in telecoupled systems. And this fits really perfect in our session, and that's the reason why he is here. And we met for the first time last year at the Global Land Program meeting in Bern. So, we had wonderful talks, and so Sebastian, the floor is yours, and thank you for being here.
Sorry. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Thomas, for inviting me also and be part of this group. I'm very honored, and I learn a lot as well to see other perspectives. So perhaps I will start with my presentation now. So if I'm able to share my screen here, can you see my screen? Can you see my screen?
Not up to now.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, then I need to switch. Sorry, just 1 minute. Okay, so this is going to be here, and this is going to be here. Can you see it?
Yes, it starts.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so now what I will talk about is the perspective of telecoupling and environmental justice. So it's about a global and social ecological perspective of justice. I will put some emphasis on the north-south relationships, and so we can go on. So first,
Sebastian,
I will
please change to the full presentation mode. We see a split picture of your presentation.
Oh, but I am in full presentation mode theoretically. So is it better now?
No, not real.
You have to
Do you
go
have
to
another option?
Sorry?
Left above, left, top left. There you can change it.
Display settings.
Show myself here? No.
Top left.
The bar, the black bar.
I don't have any black bar.
Do you see it?
Sorry. My own picture has disappeared as well. I'm sorry. I'm lost.
Sebastian, if you will not find it, I can open it for you, and you say when I have to continue. Is it okay for you?
Yes, but I have made a few changes.
Okay.
I see only you now.
Unshare your screen and then share again.
Yes, it's done, but hi. Oh.
Maybe you stop it and start it again.
Yeah, I think it's better. Yes. Sorry. Perhaps we can. Perhaps you
Germans
can.
with border control.
Can you start with the next, perhaps, and I try to figure out? No.
Yeah, we could do that. I could start with, and in the meantime, you could send your presentation to Thomas.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
Thomas can start it.
Okay.
You do it like this?
Yes.
But you have to finish the sharing mode. first.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't even have a leave meeting button. I just have a screen with all your faces, but not mine. And it's very weird. So I perhaps I just restart my computer and go on, please. Okay.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, then we switch to the presentation of Ludger, I would say. And Sebastian, when you will be the last presenter, then is it okay for you?
Yeah. Yes. It's okay.
Yeah?
It's okay. Yes.
Okay, so then we will first go to Ludger. And is anyone has any one of the technical assistants the opportunity to quit the presentation of Sebastian? So yeah, wonderful.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
It's okay. It's okay.
So we will have the presentation of Ludger Gailing now. Ludger Gailing is a professor for regional planning at the Brandenburg University of Technology in the famous city of Cottbus. And his research interests are in the field of regional spatial development, energy transition, and infrastructure development. And he's doing this job for several years, dealing with energy transition and infrastructure development. And he's also interested in these special dimensions of justice, common goods, and as well as transformative issues and transformative governance as well. So, and Ludger, the floor is yours. Start with the presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much, Thomas. Do you hear me and do you see the presentation? Is everything okay?
Yeah, wonderful. Perfect.
Okay. So let's start. Spatial justice and energy justice, a case of wind power plants. I did this presentation together with Eva Eichenauer, who is here with us from the Leibniz Institute for Research on Society and Space, the IRS. So what will we do today? I will talk a little bit about this specific aspect of energy justice and the theoretical debate around it, which is a quite new one. Then I will come to our empirical case, the aspect of wind energy development in Mecklenburg-Western Pomerania, and just to draw some conclusions in the end. So energy justice, according to the literature, what is energy justice all about? Ben Sovacool and others, they define energy justice as a global energy system that fairly disseminates both the benefits and costs of energy services, and one that contributes to more representative and impartial energy decision making. Thematically, this perspective is focused on injustices occurring in connection with the energy system, so modes of production, on consumption of energy, decision-making processes in relation to the energy system, and so on. And it has a clear conceptual value. We will show that later on, but at the same time, for many researchers in the field, it also represents an inherently policy-oriented approach to justice. It should therefore provide decision makers and activists and so on with a sort of framework to actually facilitate just energy decisions. So what is new in this framework? One thing that is new is that it adds another important dimension of justice. It adds the recognition dimension. And there is a critical dimension of Axel Honneth and Nancy Fraser to the debate on justice and renewable energy infrastructure. Before, it was rather in tradition of the Rawlsian philosophy of justice focused on fair distribution of goods on the one hand and fair rules of distribution, hence the procedural justice on the other hand. So in their foundational paper, Macaulay and their colleagues developed this three-dimensional sort of framework for researching energy justice, and the three aspects are distribution, where do we find just or unjust distribution of costs and benefits? How equitable is the allocation of risks and opportunities? And then procedure, what about the access to decision-making power? how do procedures lead to just or unjust energy decisions, and the sort of new aspect, recognition, how to change logics of recognition or of non-recognition and other power asymmetries. So this extends the existing energy research by the dimension of recognition in the sense of an appreciative recognition of positions, interests, and identities, and thus also includes these power aspects and structural disadvantages in the analysis. So what about the relation between energy justice and spatial justice? When it comes to distributional justice, the answer is quite clear. It is often about the question of the spatial distribution of energy infrastructures and resource extraction, as well as their direct effects and their external effects in the sense of benefits and costs. Procedural justice generally focuses on identifying those who plan and make rules, laws, and decisions, and those who can have a say in such processes. In terms of spatial aspects, this is the most important issue in thinking about spatial planning. Accessibility, open participation, transparency, representation, and so on are here important issues. And these aspects may have a spatial dimension. And finally, recognition justice focuses on identifying people or collective actors whose weaknesses or vulnerability may be worsened as a result of a process such as an energy transition. So it is about taking seriously the arguments of those who may face vulnerability, discrimination, and so on. To make it a little bit more complicated, Ben Sovacool and others lately added a fourth category to these three, cosmopolitan justice. As members of a global community of human beings, cosmopolitan justice holds that the way to individual and communal mutual benefit is to treat others as they themselves would wish to be treated. And here we are in the famous context of intragenerational and also intergenerational justice, what we already know from the debates related to sustainability. So it is a very important fourth aspect. So let's come to the case of Mecklenburg, Western Pomerania. Here we are, this is Mecklenburg, Western Pomerania, Mecklenburg-Vorpommern in the northeast of Germany. And this here is our project region. This, Thomas mentioned it already from the Regelrecht project. Rural districts around the rather small capital of the state of Mecklenburg, Western Pomerania, Schwerin. And coming to the issues of wind power development in the state of Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, in this state, nearly 2,000 wind turbines of power production are installed onshore. This is the 7th highest installed megawatt onshore wind capacity in Germany, nearly 75% times more production than needed for their own consumption. And unlike in other wind-intensive states, like neighboring Schleswig-Holstein, local and regional revenues are low, and there are only a few wind farms with community participation or community ownership. And what we already found out in other research projects is that it is common, especially in East Germany, to become passive, we call it installation landscapes, rather than active action arenas, with little local involvement in the planning of or benefiting from wind energy generation. So Mecklenburg, Western Pomerania has the lowest population density of all German states, and the land often is not owned by local communities or local farmers. This is a big difference compared to Western German states. Hence, there is a lack of the resources needed to set up energy cooperatives or privately invest in wind power. While the state is a net exporter of renewable electricity, locally added value from business taxes is low. However, for sure, renewable energies have the potential to create significant added value to the region. In Mecklenburg, Western Pomerania, the state has the second most jobs in the sector of renewable energies of all German states. So this is already about justice, many wind farms, but low local added value, high rate of renewable energy production, but for the export, rural areas bear the brunt for the landscape interventions and political conflicts on the ground. The energy transition is prompting, and the structural weaknesses for sure, the past dependencies, result in little financial benefits remaining in the region. In order to address the rising conflicts over wind power development, 2016, the state of Mecklenburg-Vorpommern was the first one to implement a law that made financial participation of communities or residents in such projects mandatory. And the rationale behind the law was to increase acceptance through enforcing community benefits. I will here not go into the details of the law and of the procedure. If you understand German, you may read our policy paper mentioned here on this side. My colleague Eva Eichenauer did a lot of field work around Schwerin in the small villages affected by wind projects in order to see if the law has changed something. And here are some results of her field work. Typically, justice issues arise at local level where wind farms are constructed. And we may take a closer look on the situation from three angles. The first one, the individual level, lots of conflicts based on feelings of unfairness. I have not been asked. My opinion, my stakes do not count. These are issues related to procedural or recognition justice. Others earn a lot of money, the dentists in Düsseldorf or Frankfurt in Western Germany. We are left with a spoiled view, so distributional justice. Why here we already produce more than we need? Then the second angle, the institutional arrangements involved. Not all arguments count in licensing and planning procedures. Communities not involved in licensing, they do not have decision-making power in some of these planning processes. And the third issue, the structural level of de facto unequal distribution of financial benefits. So there is yet no federal regulation on local regional value creation. The rent goes to the landowner, and individual negotiations between residents, local communities, and projects operators are needed. So issues of distributional and procedural justice are at stake. So we come to our conclusions. Using the framework of energy justice has proved to be productive, and we are still working on it. The third category is recognition, for sure, is an important one, but it is a complicated one. It introduces a critical perspective: who says what kinds of things are relevant to the procedures, how are arguments legitimized and delegitimized in conflicts. This applies to both sides. Not only are opponents of wind power sometimes wrongly called NIMBY, but the opponents themselves are also quick to delegitimize arguments. One can be bribed, one would have no idea, one is not able to speak, for example. And it opens the perspective to the recognition aspect of distributional justice of the burdens for siting villages. And this reminds us of the fact that these streams of justice have intersections and interconnections. The three aspects are intermingled. So it would be really important for us to add this aspect of recognition, as well as also try to implement and to think about this aspect of cosmopolitan global spatial justice that Ecological mentions. These would be really important add-ons for thinking about spatial justice in general. And then the last point, like climate justice, energy justice has a normative potential. And in our Regelrecht project, we do our best to use this potential. One small example from our case study, we articulate the often neglected perspective of small villages, for example, vis-a-vis the state ministry in Schwerin, and point out ways in which aspects of procedural justice and recognition justice could be taken seriously in the future. So this could be part of our research project to use the dimensions of this framework as a tool for transdisciplinary research projects. So thank you very much.
We don't hear anything.
So, thank you for the presentation, Ludger. And are there any questions? I don't see any questions in the chat here in our small club. Yeah, Wolfgang Köck, one question, yes?
Yeah, just a short question to the dimensions of energy justice. So, energy justice, is it just what you are speaking about, or when we listen to the energy justice debate, we can also hear from the debate about energy poverty, and energy poverty is maybe also an aspect of energy justice. And what do you think about that relationship?
Please, the short answer, please, Ludger.
Yeah, short answer is, especially for people working in the UK, energy poverty is a really important issue. Also for people working in the global south about these issues. In Germany, this debate yet is not so strong, but for sure, especially for the authors I mentioned, energy poverty is an important issue, and it is already intermingled within the theoretical debate around energy justice. It is part of it. It is an important issue, but yet not so much in the German debate.
Okay, thank you. We are a little bit running out of time, so that's the reason why I will end now the discussion here and switch over to Sebastian. Will you try it again, or should I open the presentation?
Yeah, I'll try it again because I had several screens on, so now it should work. Okay, so can you see my presentation mode now? No?
So it started, but it ended.
Okay, so again.
Yes.
Okay, so then it should.
We see your wonderful screen with a lot of data, and yes,
you got it. You got it.
And
is it okay?
Presentation mode. So we have also two parts, a split the screen here.
Strange.
Same like before.
Oh. Now I have the black bar here. Okay. I have the black bar. So if somebody can tell me.
It says display settings.
Full screen for participants? No. Settings, yes.
Display settings. The top left.
The top left.
We can also see your slides like this. So if it doesn't work, maybe continue like this.
Okay. Okay, sorry. Okay, then I'll continue. Okay, so yeah, so first, I will talk about the problem setting. What does it mean to do environmental justice in a globalized context? And then I will show the challenges that this brings in the framing of justice, and then explore some solutions and some possible new framings for environmental justice in those contexts. Okay, so first, just a small word about what environmental justice is and where it comes from. So basically, it was the term was coined in the United States, and it was the idea that the socially disadvantaged people, like ethnic minority, like Afro-American people or Native American people, were bearing more environmental burdens. And then it gave rise to a whole bunch of studies on why this happens and how, and it became a political discourse, it became a social movement, but also a field of study. But then if we expand this, so here in the middle of the screen, we have what traditional environmental justice is. So it's the idea that some people affect the environment in a closed geographic setting, like a country, and then the modified environment affects other people that are not necessarily us. No, so it's already this discrimination between two groups. But then we can add the spatial dimension as well. And the idea that the third screen right, some people get benefits from the environment, but those who bear the burden are distant. They are in other countries on the other continents. So we are talking about the global environmental justice. No? And an example here is the example of my own country, Switzerland. Switzerland relies for 84% of the products of Switzerland that use land to be produced. They use land which is not in the Swiss territory. So it means that there are virtual land flows, that traded goods rely on land use, and they put environmental burdens on other countries. For example, if Switzerland imports wood from Russia, for example, to make furniture, then the deforestation and the impacts are in Russia, no, or in Africa, and so on. So it's very relevant that a country can be clean in ecological sense, but then they shift the burdens to another country, and according to a center-periphery dynamics and what we call an ecological unequal exchange. So the telecoupling framework is useful to look at that because we are looking at systems that are coupled through distance, but not in a only ecological sense, which would be the teleconnection framing, or an economic or socio-economic sense, which is the globalization framing, but we try to put them together. And this is the rationale for doing telecoupling, is looking at the flows of matter, species, money, information that have both social and ecological impact. Can you see my screen still, or do we have issues? Yeah. Okay. A typical example is the soybean flows that are cultivated in Brazil and then they are exported to China, and with a whole chain of import and export and respective environmental burdens. But this is another example. Telecoupling is also relevant in biodiversity conservation. For example, a national park in Madagascar can be funded by people in Europe and the US. They can have tourists coming from those countries, but they can also have illegal extraction of resources that go to Asia, for example. No? So the question is who wins and who loses in those processes? No? How just are those processes? And so I'm going to give some theoretical aspect of what is justice. I'm using the framing of Thomas Sikor, who says that there are dimensions of justice, there are subjects, and there are criteria. No, dimensions of justice is more on the politics side. So it's a framing that we have seen in the last presentation as well. It's about distribution, how the harms and benefits are allocated, but also the participation, who makes decisions, and how, and also recognition. No, who is recognized? What is the status of minorities and culturally different people? No, and then in the ethics side is about who deserves to claim justice, and then the criteria. What are the principles of justice? If we look at the classic justice framing, like in the liberal democracy, like John Rawls, we see that in the dimension we take procedures and we take distribution, but we're not talking about recognition yet. No, as subject of justice, we have only the individual citizens of a sovereign nation state. We're not talking about relations between states. And the criteria is the idea that the least advantaged should get a benefit and have equality of opportunity. But in a global social ecological setting, it challenges this theory. First is because we have cross-border issues, so we need to have a post-Westphalian framing and also a post-territorial framing. Then it also challenges the principles of justice because we have a plurality of culture and levels of governance. And also it challenges the idea of procedures and distribution because we need to consider also the recognition of minorities and cultural diversity. So now I'm going to explore a little bit those dimensions and how they could look like in a telecoupled setting. So one interesting framing is the idea that ecosystem services have interregional flows. So what are the ecosystem services that go from a country to another when a product is exported or a burden is exported? But the problem with this framing is that the ecosystem services itself is a utilitarian concept of nature, which is perhaps not shared among all the actors that are involved. The valuation language varies among the actors. So this is why we need to expand also to the process. So who is participating and can also bring his or her views forward, and how the diversity of valuation languages is taken into account in the process. For example, here we see that an ecosystem service framing, in the case of the National Park of Masoala in Madagascar, we see that the three processes, which is timber extraction, conservation, and cash crops, the local people, who are the poorest people, they bear most of the costs, and the costs are long-term, and the benefits are usually short-term. Now, this is a merely distributive perspective, but we might ask how and why this happens. No? An idea is to expand the idea of procedural justice with the identification of the social spaces in which the actors interact and make the decisions. So the scale is no longer fixed, but it's adapted to the issue at stake. So the idea is, for example, to look at the local setting, the distance setting, and also the setting around the flows. So who is responsible in this case? No? And an option could be to base responsibility on the income. So this means that on the money that people make, the more money they make, the more responsible they are. No, it's the ability to pay principle. But recognition justice is very important in North-South settings because it's the respect of the identity and the right to be different, and it cannot be captured in distributive issues. It has to do with coloniality, in the sense that colonial power asymmetries, I think it's very similar to what we have said between rural and urban areas, in the sense that there's a discourse that dismisses specific groups of people. No? And this also dismisses their knowledge. It dismisses their way to relate with nature. So I will show you an example here. It's again this national park in Madagascar. So the park in above here has been advertised in they have a relation with the Zoo of Zurich in Switzerland, and there is an exhibition which is permanent on this park, and in counterpart the zoo finances the park. No? And in the exhibition you can see here it's in German, so most of you understand. Below you have the English translation, that in the zoo they explain that local villagers are people who like burning. They like burning forest because they find it nice, and it's also because of their religious beliefs and because of their superstitions and so on. But this claim has no anthropological evidence. There's a study of an anthropologist who went there and she didn't find any evidence of this belief to exist. So it's a belief. Ascribing this belief to the people actually dismisses them. It makes them look like pyromaniacs, no? Like people who are backward and who cannot manage the park by themselves. No? And as a consequence, there was a very strict framing of the park, and the villagers were denied access to the small island you can see there. And in this island, there are burial grounds, so it's an ancestor place, and they could not go and worship their ancestors because of the strict framing of the park. So this is typically an issue of misrecognition. No? It's not a matter of distribution, it's a matter of how an identity is respected in an environmental setting. And yes, what I want to show here is that if we expand recognition justice to include other cultural views, then we might also expand the subject of justice. We might expand on who is entitled to a justice claim. For example, we have talked about the ancestors in this case of Madagascar, but in other cultures we also have the idea that there are spirits, that places are living being, for example, that ecosystems are living being, and even in Europe we also have this idea that trees or animals are sentient beings. So it gives an option to expand the subject of justice in a not only in a spatial sense, but also in a temporal and in an ontological sense. Okay, so as conclusions, I just want to sum it up and show that the globalization and the burden shifting challenge, it challenges the view of justice, which is based on nation states and territories, and also a merely distributive view of justice. We need to look at procedures, but we also need to look at recognition, and in particular the diversity of valuation languages about nature and the environment. No? And expanding this might also expand the subject of justice in an ontological and in a temporal sense. Okay, thank you very much for your attention, and sorry for the technical issues. Then I'll leave the floor for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you very much.
So how I do stop sharing here? Okay.
So, and we see the next guests in the room as Katrin Spott, for example. So, so we have only a few minutes left here. So we are running out of time because normally the session would end at 3. So we are now at 3:06. So are there urgent questions? Do we have some urgent questions? If not, I would say as a final round, we can't have a full discussion now, but we could have one comment, one sentence comment from every presenter as a final comment. Wolfgang Köck has left the room now. Annette Steinführer, one sentence, 2 minutes, says Julia Reis, wonderful. Annette Steinführer, 30 seconds, two sentences as a comment, final comment. Lessons learned.
I think we had a good start in bringing very different justice perspectives to each other, and I would really like to go on in this discussion. So thank you very much.
Ludger?
Yeah, just a short remark. The presentation of Sebastian was really interesting from the global perspective, and I think it would be really good to think about the vocabulary used in your presentation when it comes to our local and regional conflicts in Germany, and so especially when it comes to the aspect of recognition justice. Here Eva and I, we started thinking about it, and I think it was a first step to think about it, and there are another steps needs to be done, needs to be taken.
Sebastian?
Yes, thank you. I was also doing a similar remark, especially when I see the presentation by Annette. I think it's very striking because what she shows in the rural-urban setting within Germany is really what I could see in a north-south setting. No, all this idea of discrimination, you know, when you speak about verbal injustice, I immediately speak about think about recognition or misrecognition. No, so I see that sometimes we are talking about the same thing with different words because we work in a within north setting or within north-south setting and even in a south-south setting. So I think we have a lot in common. And when I see, for example, what you say about municipalities submitting projects and relying on projects, it's typically a syndrome that we have in the developing world. So we have NGOs bringing projects, and then the project ends, and you know it's a projectorate. What we call that a projectorate, no? But it's typically a development setting. So now it seems that the idea of development is not anymore for developing countries, but it's everywhere. So we really have to harmonize our language, and I think we have a lot to learn from each other. Thank you.
So, thank you, and I have no further comments on this. So my idea is we should continue the discussion, and I think I will invite all the participants of today to a video conference during the next few weeks, so that we can share our ideas a little bit more. That would be helpful because we have now no more time to discuss it. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to all presenters. Thank you for the conference organizers, and special thanks also to our technical support, especially to Julia Reis and the other colleague. I have missed the name, Mr. Kanitz, I think. So thanks a lot again, and see you on the conference or where